Hey, thanks, Alan. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks again to Alan and Mary. Did I pronounce it Anne Mary? Everyone at the Robson Reading Series for organizing this event and for inviting me here today. I'm honored to read today. I was originally going to read 3 pieces for you today, but there are time constraints that I need to be aware of. And because I want to do justice to each piece and not simply steamroll through them, I felt it necessary to sacrifice one of the pieces I was going to read. So I'll be reading just 2 pieces for you today. I'm here primarily to launch my book, Falling in Time, but I thought I'd start with a reading of an essay of mine that was originally published in Rice Paper, which is a wonderful literary magazine published here in Vancouver, and it was just recently selected for inclusion in the anthology that Alan mentioned, Best Canadian Essays 2011. Published by Tightrope Books in Toronto. A big surprise for me, but I was really thrilled to be included. This essay is about the great opera singer Maria Callas, and it's part of a larger collection of essays that I'm currently working on that basically talks about the works of art and artists that had or have relevance for me as a gay man, and in particular the ones that influenced me profoundly when I was growing up. So the book is part memoir, part literary and cultural criticism, and part queer theory. The funny thing is, these works had or have relevance not just for me, but for seemingly a lot of other gay men as well. And it's not that most of these works are even overtly gay. Most of them, in fact, are not. So there's a sensibility in these artworks and in these artists that I explore in this book that for some reason attracts many gay men, and it's this sensibility that I'd like to explore with these essays. So this essay is about Maria Callas, as I said. The great, those of you who don't know who Maria Callas was or only have a passing knowledge of her, she was a great Greek-American opera soprano, arguably the greatest operatic soprano of the 20th century, certainly the most magnetic and electrifying. And in this essay that I've written, I try to articulate my feelings for her and also talk about, explore why she was so attractive or why she remains so attractive to so many gay men, and in particular older gay men from the pre-Stonewall era. So I will read about 85% of the essay. I'm going to skip over the more pedantic and esoteric parts, because they don't read well. The title of the essay is Notes Towards an Essay About Maria Callas. And excuse my voice, I'm fighting a bit of a cold today, so. My journal entry, dated April 5th, 1994. Homosexuality equals shamanism equals the chosen equals antennae of the world. Further down, art points skyward, defies nature, transcends the muck. It is without question the highest human faculty. Anthropology and Camille Paglia nudging a Filipino gay boy toward self-acceptance. The ego consolidation of a newly out sophomore. But despite a newfound Buddhist emphasis on ego devaluation, those ideas are still with me, still motor my daily existence. I want to write an essay about Maria Callas, the greatest operatic soprano of the 20th century. Most modern classical music stars dwell in rarefied peaks, free from the glare of the masses, subjects of esoteric study. Maria Callas was an exception. She was a pre-Stonewall icon, the gay cultural intelligentsia's Judy Garland. To adore Callas in the 21st century is to regress, retreat, which is why I'm writing this essay, to remember a fabled, war-torn time. The essay I want to write is about adoration and inertia. La Bohème was my favorite opera once upon a time, but I eventually tired of it, coming to see it as opera light. But surfing YouTube 2 years ago, I happened across an audio recording of Mimi's Act 1 aria, rendered by Maria Callas, a singer I'd never particularly cared for. Her voice emerges from my laptop, that hard-to-describe naked sound that has always divided opinion. 2.5 minutes in, the aria swells towards its high point. Ma quando vien lo cielo, il primo sole mio. The simple, virginal Mimi singing of how spring's first kiss is hers. Callas and orchestra in perfect synchronicity as the world for a moment lifts the veils from sensuality, and a stodgy, effete art form becomes a container for living truth. I'm not hyperbolizing when I call my Callas moment one of existential clarity, when my East met my West, when all came to Librium. So began my personal study, one undertaken, so it seems, by many other gay men, of the life and art of Maria Callas, ugly duckling, musical genius, the narrative of her life, informed by egomania, willpower, metamorphosis, sexual frustration and fulfillment, and finally tragedy, is undeniably queer. The lonely outsider who pays the price for professional and personal acceptance. But the most efficient manifestation of her queerness is her art, a masterpiece drawn from imperfection, insecurity, and a bit of hate. You know the story. He's bullied and ostracized. So, the young gay boy retreats to be the best of whatever he's good at, period. Not the best he can be, but the best, period. Just as society invokes objective standards in condemning his burgeoning sexuality, so the young gay boy invokes them in his quest for perfection. Callas attracts a lot of gay men because she's the best, period. And she became the very best, despite a bevy of disadvantages, a broken home, a difficult mother, an ungainly figure, and a seemingly untamable voice. In The Queen's Throat, his brilliant and now legendary paean to opera, Wayne Kirstenbaum writes, that the listener's body is illuminated, opened up. A singer doesn't expose her own throat, she exposes the listener's interior. When I listen to Callas, every trill, every cadenza becomes a journey out of the dregs, a manifestation of her personal triumphs, and by extension, mine. In her unflinching artistry, I see my own obsessive-compulsive perfectionism. In her astonishing mid-career weight loss, my metamorphosis from willowy geek to muscle-bound quasi-Adonis. As a young gay boy, I was shy and artsy, and while I managed to escape physical bullying, backtalk and exclusion were inevitable. Scholastic excellence was my weapon, as was success as a classical pianist. Egos that are mutilated eventually balloon, and for most of my life, it's been egomania that's gotten me up in the morning, a narcissistic search for vengeance against a world that I was convinced was against me. Therapy and meditation are doing their job, I'm happy to report. I adore Callas because she avenges on my behalf. The Greek-American fat girl becomes svelte prima donna of La Scala. Each diamond-pointed gruppetto, every sweeping arpeggio is an act of revenge against gay bashers, against all who ever crossed me. Indeed, Callas's own words, "We artists must whip ourselves into shape like a soldier, and I would not kill my enemies, but I will make them get down on their knees," suggest a militaristic, score-settling approach to her craft. And there is the story of Maria the woman, whose nun-like devotion to her calling ended for all intents and purposes when she met shady Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. The virginal high priestess of opera had lived most of her life in her throat. The extraordinarily sexual Onassis opened her up to the rest of her body, a body she'd hated, even when she lost weight, a body that, for most of her life, nobody had ever wanted. My journal entry dated August 7th, 2000. Went the full 9 yards finally, pure total blandishment. That a man like D, with his manliness, his Greekness, his swagger, would want me with my awkwardness, my Filipinaness, my inexperience. He's a collector, yes. I was willing to be collected. My first real man. He left me a bit more of one. Opera is pre-modern, steeped in the past, home to myth, old-style melodrama, and stereotypical notions of sex and gender. When gay men love Callas, they are embracing pre-modernism while queering it up royally. For she drags hidden human truths out of sexist archaic stories, out of effete Rococo centuries-old out of that effete Rococo centuries-old closet that is opera. Absolute honesty is queer. Notions of normalcy are always relative. Callas simultaneously embraced the norms of bel canto singing and broke through them to illuminate the only reality that ultimately counts, human emotion. She was the most profoundly gifted vocal artist of her century, one whose polychromatic voice could encapsulate every nuance and sub-nuance of feeling. There is no irony in Callas philia, as there is with Garland philia or Monroe philia. When gays align themselves with Callas, they align themselves with greatness. But it is greatness haunted by the omnipresence of the abyss, by intimations of what can, and in Callas's voice, did go wrong. The great Callas scholar John Ardoin likens the experience of listening to Callas to watching a trapeze act. Usually there is a net below, but on those rare instances where there is not, a completely different atmosphere is created. The very being of each spectator seems to be bound up in each step taken on high, says Ardoin, for there is no longer any semblance of pretense. Callas's vocal fall was legendary, ugly. Her hard-won artistic victories were pyrrhic, unequaled greatness for a too brief time, pushing her voice beyond its natural fach, tackling the most technically intimidating repertoire, giving every ounce of herself to each and every performance. She seemed constitutionally incapable of performing with a net. And while this cost Callas her voice, her career was essentially over by age 42. It is what gave her singing its abyss-defying life and death intensity. Singing for me is not an act of pride, but an effort to elevate toward those heavens where everything is harmony, she once said. But she could never escape the abyss. Indeed, she always seemed to be staring it down. Her singing, even at its most technically brilliant, never sounded easy. It always carried with it a knowledge of the fragility of greatness and of the unspeakable horrors that lurk beneath it. Death, the opposite is desire, says Blanche in Tennessee Williams's masterwork, A Streetcar Named Desire, a startlingly prophetic précis of the late 20th century gay male experience, defined as it was by the polarities of erotic fulfillment and deadly disease. Physical love, in the face of sordid, mythopoeically laden fatality, became even more intense, more transcendent, an act of ecstatic defiance against the ever-present threat of death. La grande vocaccia, the ugly voice, become the instrument of the century's sublimest operatic expression. To mold beauty out of ugliness is the queerest of acts, from the channeling of deviancy into the creation of polychrome frescoes, to the transmuting of HIV-positive statuses into masks of desirability. Gay men are often expert alchemists, reliant on magic to survive. In the magic of Callus's music, we see the sanctioned version of our own all-too-private narratives, our own tortuous, ferociously willed ascents to greatness. Whether these ascents are actualized or merely dreamt of is moot. Callus reminds us that, no matter how brilliant we make ourselves or how accessible become the corridors of power, disaster is always just a stone's throw away. Alas, these are only notes towards an essay. To actually write one would be to regress completely to an age of masks, when passion was sublimated, when brilliance was born of suffering, when we revered the likes of Callus because there was no out and proud icon to revere, when we fed off heteronormativity and built a parasitic culture out of parody and pastiche. These love notes to Callus, then, are love notes to the closet, a place that inhibited action, but that ignited imagination, where unassuaged pain and suffering were catalysts for great art, where a voice as queer as Maria Callas's could be called beautiful. Actually, I need a Kleenex. Is there a... yeah, but actually, if my mom has a Kleenex, she can... It's my cold acting up, so... Right. Thank you. See, that's why it's nice to have your mothers at readings. They'll always... they'll always help you out when you need them. So, all right. So I'm going to read now from Falling in Time. The play premiered last November here in Vancouver. It's set partly in 1994 here in Vancouver. 1994 was the year of the death of North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, and it's also set partly in early 1950s Korea during the Korean War. And it's about how the lives of 4 individuals intertwine over the course of 4 decades and across 2 continents. And I should also add that the music of Billie Holiday is very prominent throughout the play. So the first character that I'm going to read today is Steve. So just to give you a background on Steve, he's 65. He's an American Korean War vet living in Vancouver. He is terminally ill with cancer, and he's also a raging alcoholic. Through probably 80% of the play, he's intoxicated. So he has, I mean, those of you who saw the play will remember. He has a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness. The Korean War permanently scarred him and continues to haunt him. In many ways, he is very much the stereotype of the ugly American, but he does have hidden depth, which I hope these monologues that I read for you today demonstrate. So this scene, this monologue of Steve's I'm going to be reading now, is from early in the play. He's just found out about his diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. So he's obviously very self-destructive at this point, and he's in a bar. I tell ya, the Canucks have got to fucking brush up on their defense. Did you see that game against the Rangers? Fucking incompetence. 3-2, 5 minutes left in the third. A fucking 1-goal lead they had, and the Rangers quiet as pansies. Then some 5th-line teeny bopper from a foreign team ends up tying it. How in hell on God's green earth did that fucking happen? I'll tell you how. They fucking fell asleep. They may as well have emptied the ice in the net because the path was fucking clear for them to score that goal. Jesus, they fell asleep. But they're playing for a sleepy-ass city. How can they not fall asleep? Even my hometown Indiana had more get-up than this Lotus Roost. You know what happens when people fall asleep, buddy boy? They die. They fucking die. I, for one, never sleep. Okay, I nod off a couple of hours or so, but I don't sleep the way others do. And you know why? Because sleep's for sissies. It's kimchi. You know what kimchi is, don't you? You don't? What? You just crawl out of the backwoods? You've never heard of kimchi? Where are you from? Surrey? Kimchi. Christ, it's only the best food ever created. Gets you revved up, it gets you all horny. I fucked like a rat when I was back in Korea. A lot of Korean bitches had a fill of this here, and are happier women for it. You think in a million years it'd get what I gave them from their men? They're a bit underblessed, to put it, as they say, delicately. But kimchi, fuck, it made a warrior out of me. I'd sneak as much as I could into the barracks and I'd eat it every morning. I'd get this fucking rush and my day'd be all set. I got into amazing shape. My biceps were hard as melons. Still got them, by the way. Not bad for a pensioner. But more important, I was a great soldier, so great that after the war I decided to keep doing it because it was my vocation, my calling, like some are called to the priesthood. Did I tell you that during the war I got by on a measly 2 hours of sleep every day? When everyone else was asleep, I was busy doing push-ups. Do you know what happens if people die, don't you? They die, they fucking die. Boxers today. They got nothing on Marciano. Saw him fight his last fight live in Yankee Stadium 2 years after Korea. Caught a hop there from Fort Riley, the most beautiful moment of my life. A fucking gladiator he was. Bullet-like passes, both hands. Then he'd work his way in and wham, bam, the uppercut. Moore's head snapping back like a petal off a daisy. Now, he floored Rocky in the second, but Rocky came storming back. He wasn't about to let his perfect record slip away. He knocked the sucker down 5, count him 5 times. Right, left, right, down. Left, right, left, down, down. 49-0. Perfection attained. Blood, vomit, and yellow-skinned commies. But at home, in that ring, there was God. Jazz. You like jazz? What do you mean you hate it? More like you don't understand it. You can't hate what you don't understand now, can you? There's no shame in admitting you're stupid. In fact, more people should. The world would run a hell of a lot smoother if they did. Now, if you, for example, would just admit that you're stupid, you wouldn't be here arguing with me now, and we'd both be having a nicer time. I heard them all, live. Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Lester Young. Saw Billie Holiday in a club in Cincy, a year from the grave and looking like a pile of bamboo sticks. Long gloves to cover the needle marks, high as a fucking kite. But it didn't matter. She was singing in that special way of hers, like she didn't fucking care, except you knew she cared too much. I swear if teardrops had a voice, they'd sound like Billie Holiday. The lifeline, I called it. That's what her voice was. This line from the soul that carried all of life's wears and tears. The last song she sang that night was, "Tain't nobody's business if I do." Chin up, brow arched. It was like she was saying, ain't gonna change, ain't following no law but my own. Gonna keep going. ain't never giving up. The next character I'm going to read is Jamie. So Jamie is a 30-year-old ESL teacher. He's also an American living in Vancouver. He's nebbish, he's intellectual, emotionally very, very guarded, thanks in part to a childhood experience that really wounded him. Politically, he's the flip side of Steve. He's like the Michael Moore to Steve's Rush Limbaugh. And this is evident, I think, in a monologue that I'm going to read, in which he is on the phone with his mother. And it's a long-distance call, because his mother is in Kansas. And what's also evident here is his fondness for a particular indulgence that I think most people will recognize as being very Vancouver. So. Hello. Hello, Mother. How are you? Oh, the usual. Teaching. Mother, I was home just last Christmas. Mother, I haven't lived there in 12 years. Why on earth would I want to go back now? You know as well as I do that there's nothing left for me in Kansas. I don't believe in wizards, and I think Dorothy's a bitch. Mother, I don't care that there's a Democrat in the White House. Clinton has proven to be a colossal disappointment. Utterly spineless, like the rest of the liberal establishment. If he was all that, you'd all be on your honeymoon now with universal health care. Instead, the man cowers the slightest conservative bullying. Mother, pragmatism is the place of recoil for those too cowardly to lead. You do not govern by consensus if who you're governing is a pack of bumpkins brainwashed by 2 centuries of libertarian groupthink. You've got to push them out of the cave and up to the light, even if it kills them. And frankly, I hope it does kill them, some of them at least. America could use a few fewer Rush Limbaughs, don't you think? Meanwhile, there are genocides happening in Rwanda and Bosnia that, with no material interest to protect, we've simply watched from the sidelines. And so no, Mother, nothing's changed. In fact, it's getting worse. With the rise of the fundamentalists, we're going the way of the Third Reich. Besides, I'm happy in Vancouver. Well, maybe happy is the wrong word, given my propensity for melancholia, but I do feel inconspicuous here. I don't stand out here the way I do in Topeka. I guess I'm loopy everywhere, but I'm closer to the center in Vancouver. Liberal isn't a dirty word here, and people don't judge. I can assure you, Mother, I'm not smoking anything. You know I can't stand that stuff. I'm going to read now from the third main character in the play, who's Chang Hyun. That's his name. And he's a young ESL student from Seoul, studying English in Vancouver. He has a lot of anti-Western sentiment in him, and he's recovering from a traumatic experience in the Korean military. FYI, the compulsory military service, in Korea, military service is compulsory for young men. So he's recovering from that, but he also has a very schmaltzy side to him, which is evident in this scene that I'm going to read. And in this scene, he's having an English lesson with Jamie, who is his conversation tutor. So. If we just find that scene, yes. Here we go. Okay. So Chang-hyun, what's your favorite movie? Sound of Music. Why? Scene in middle of a movie. Captain sing and play guitar for first time. He has beautiful voice. He and Maria look at each other. They have connection. They fall in love, get married, live happily ever after. It is true story, beautiful story. I want to hate this movie because it's typical American bullshit. They think all you need is music and good cheer and all the world's problems disappear. Disgusting and dangerous. That's why Americans get away with everything. They can lie, they can kill, they can interfere. As long as there's cute children and pretty tune, everything okie dokie. But the story in Sound of Music is beautiful and true. It is how life should be. It make me cry. I'm going to read now from the character of Eun-ha, who really is the narrator of the play, standing outside the action. She's kind of the glue that holds everything together, and she's also the grandmother of Chang-hyun. She's 65, and she's actually dead by the time the play starts. She survived the Korean War, which killed most of her family and devastated her personally in every way. So I'm going to string together two of her monologues from the second act. And in these monologues, she is recounting her and her family's experience during the war. "6 months in, the North had stormed through and destroyed everything. Miraculously, our village stayed intact. Yes, what I knew remained as is, which you might think was a comfort, but I'd rather they'd destroyed everything right away. Do you understand? I'd have done away with the illusion that everything would be fine. But 6 months passed before it happens, my biggest shame. I encouraged my brother to volunteer with the Americans. When he left, my bones felt it, the ground beneath, the great shift. From there, more shifts, the strands loosening, tearing apart the fabric. The village nearby became a heap of wooden bones. We went south to live with Uncle, Aunt scurrying to another cleft. In 2 weeks, my father, body shriveled to a sliver, shitting and vomiting blood, skin blanched and rashed, hands toward me like I am God, beseeching, hanging on. But I am not God. When I'm alone, I am screaming. With my father's last breath, I saw God's true colors." I'm going to close today with one final monologue from Steve. And this is from the very end of the first act. And Steve is addressing Chang-hyun. He is drunk in this scene, and he's haunted by very painful war memories. Think you're tough, huh? You come here foaming at the mouth with your self-righteous commie bullshit. It's all just words to you. fucking emissions from the mouth in a language you don't even speak. Go ahead and practice your English. But I saw. Sound effects. Gunshot. Fucking death count. 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Goddamn fucking freezing. Frozen palace of the dead. Their eyes still open. Beautiful. Beautiful. They didn't fall asleep. Men till the very end. Ice men. Ice kings. 20 from our battalion. Eyes wide open. Lovely. Lovely. Other guys breaking down. I vomit but go on. There to do a job. An arm, a torso, 2 legs, another arm. Our own Colonel Bartlett in 5 easy pieces. Strapping bulk of man, a pile of limbs on the side of the road. Do, raji, bek, do, raji, shin, san, chu, ne, bek, do, raji. Tyrone would sing that to me when I couldn't get to sleep. Some nights I couldn't because I'd forget why we... Didn't matter that no one back home gave a damn. Didn't matter that we didn't have a fucking clue what we were doing. My buddies, they died with their eyes open. Angels. All of them. Heroes. Fucking heroes. They died like men. Wish I went with them instead of... Dul puriman kaiodo dai guanjure chol chol no nunda. Thank you. I guess questions. We have how many minutes? A few minutes. 10. Right? Questions. Yeah.
Would you mind talking a little bit more about the kind of presence of music in your work? I mean, I understand that it's a like kind of a performance art too, like and so on. But does it figure sort of throughout your writing as something particularly important to you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I did study music quite intensely when I was young, and yes, very much so. It's never left me. And yeah, when I write plays, I always feel like I'm writing a piece of chamber music. So I do think in very musical terms in terms of how I structure dialogue. Yeah. So I don't know how I don't know how much more I can expand on that, but that definitely music is it's a big part of the style of my writing. So yeah.
Chris, I went to your play. I really enjoyed it. During the play, I saw different faces in the crowd, faces that I'm familiar with it from BBC. There were historians, there were scholars. How much, and certainly there's a very intellectual theme behind the play. How much research did you put into sort of looking why Korea? Why this particular?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I guess it's a perfect opportunity for me to kind of talk about the genesis of the play. I actually taught ESL here in Vancouver back in 2004. I spent that whole year teaching ESL, and I was like Jamie, a conversation tutor. Now, I just want to reassure everyone it's not autobiographical. I didn't have sex with any of my students. But not that I didn't want to. That's another story. You know, I taught ESL that year, and I learned a lot about Korean culture because half of my students were Korean. And as a conversation tutor, you talk about just about every topic under the sun. You know, because the whole point is to get them to talk. So one of the topics that came up over and over again was military service. I mean, a lot of the young Korean men that I taught had just recently completed military service, and pretty much every one of them said it was a horrible experience. Probably, you know, took away their youth, and they felt they could never get those 2 years back, and it was you know, just a terrible experience all around. There was one student who actually was quite open about the fact that he experienced sexual abuse in the military. And this was something he couldn't really talk about much in Korea because it's just so taboo. And it was only here in Vancouver that he felt he could, you know, open up about it a little. So that stuck with me when, you know, when I heard it. And you know, when you can't get rid of something, that's usually a sign for a writer that you need to write about it. That, you know, from there came the other layers of the story that, you know, is basically the narrative of Falling in Time. From there came my, you know, wanting to learn more about, you know, about the Korean War, and also exploring a little bit about why the Korean War isn't a war that we talk about as much as maybe we should, even though it's really one of the bloodiest wars in history. And I think the reason it's not talked about much is because it's a war that really still is unresolved. You know, it's not a war that has this dramatic kind of conclusion to it, the way World War II did, or the way Vietnam certainly did. And so I thought it would be interesting to write a play that brought a little bit of much needed attention to the Korean War. So yeah, so that's you know, that's the genesis of the play, and yes, I did do a lot of research on the Korean War, and yeah, I mean, it was very rewarding. It was a play that I mean, it took 6 years for me it took 6 years to develop the play, you know, from gestation to getting it on stage. So it was a pretty long and arduous process, and it took a lot out of me. But it's given so much back. So, you know, so it was a great experience. So, yeah.
How significant was President Obama's pronouncement about gay marriage the last few days?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was actually Facebooking about this. It was, you know, there's divided opinion in the gay community about it. Some people think it's a cynical act. That it's a way for it's the purpose, that the reason behind it is purely political, and I'm sure there, I think that's certainly a part of it. I don't doubt. I mean, there's always that kind of political maneuvering in every act that a politician does. I think we just have to accept that, unfortunately. That said, I think it was courageous. I do think it's pretty courageous for a sitting president in an election year to declare his support for equal marriage, considering how conservative the political landscape is in the United States. I think it's very sad that something like supporting equal marriage in this day and age should still be considered courageous. But the fact remains that it is, because of the particular political circumstances in the United States, which, I think in Canada it's a great thing that we've moved beyond that, Although we just had an abortion debate a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I'm not sure now. So I don't think we should be too complacent either here. So.